Ever wonder why we keep finding entire cities buried under places where millions of people have lived for thousands of years? In Egypt's Nile Delta, where farmers have plowed the same fields since before the pyramids were built, archaeologists just uncovered something that shouldn't exist. A city with apartment buildings, multi-story apartment buildings, from 2,400 years ago. This isn't some village with mud huts. This is Emet, a metropolis that controlled trade routes, housed thousands of people in vertical neighborhoods, and worshipped a cobra goddess who protected pharaohs. And here's what makes this discovery from June 2025 so unsettling. It was hiding in plain sight, just 10 meters underground, in one of the most densely populated regions on Earth. The first clue came from space. NASA's satellites picked up something strange beneath the fields at al-Faraun. Patterns in the soil that look suspiciously like streets and buildings. When British archaeologist Nicky Nielsen from the University of Manchester started digging based on those images, what they found challenged everything we thought we knew about ancient Egyptian cities. Picture this. You're living in the 4th century BCE, and your city is running out of space. In most of ancient Egypt, you just build outward into the desert. But in the Nile Delta, you're surrounded by precious farmland and marshes. So what do? You build up. These weren't just two-story houses with a loft. The foundations the team uncovered were massively overbuilt. Thick mud brick walls engineered to support serious weight. We're talking about structures that rose 3, maybe 4 stories high. The Egyptians were building apartment complexes when most of the world was still figuring out basic urban planning. Think about that for a second. 2,400 years ago, while Plato was philosophizing in Athens, Egyptian families were taking the stairs up to their third-floor apartments, probably complaining about the neighbors making noise on the floor above them. These tower houses were packed with extended families, workers, traders, entire communities living vertically in a way we don't see anywhere else in ancient Egypt. But why here? Why Emet? The city sat at the intersection of major trade routes crossing the delta. If you wanted to move goods between the Mediterranean and the heart of Egypt, you went through Emet. If you were a pilgrim seeking the blessing of Wadjet, the cobra goddess who protected Lower Egypt, you came to Emet. The city was simultaneously a religious center, a commercial hub, and apparently a testing ground for revolutionary urban architecture. And Wadjet wasn't just any goddess. She was the cobra on the pharaoh's crown, the uraeus that spit fire at Egypt's enemies. Her temple at Emet had been rebuilt by some of Egypt's most powerful rulers, including Ramesses II. The excavation revealed massive limestone platforms and the bases of colossal mud brick columns from her sanctuary. This wasn't a neighborhood shrine. This was a national monument. The religious artifacts they found tell us these people took their spiritual protection seriously. There's this stone stela, basically a magical healing device, showing the god Horus as a child, standing on crocodiles while gripping snakes and scorpions. The inscription and imagery weren't decorative. Ancient Egyptians would pour water over this stone, believing the liquid would absorb its protective power. Drink the water, and you're protected from venomous bites. Get bitten? The magically charged water becomes your antivenom. Sounds superstitious? Maybe. But in a world without modern medicine, in a delta teeming with cobras and crocodiles, this was their healthcare system. And it worked, at least psychologically, for thousands of years. Here's where the story gets personal. In one of the excavated houses, archaeologists found a cooking pot still sitting on its ancient hearth. Inside, the remains of a fish stew, tilapia to be specific. Someone 2,400 years ago was making dinner, probably wondering what tomorrow would bring, and never came back to finish cooking it. That pot of fish stew might be the most powerful artifact from the entire excavation. It's not gold or jewels or some pharaoh's treasure. It's dinner. Interrupted, abandoned, waiting 24 centuries for archaeologists to find it. But perhaps the biggest mystery is how a city this important, this innovative, could just disappear. The clues are in what the archaeologists found and what they didn't find. There's a ceremonial road that once connected the Temple of Wadjet to other sacred buildings. By the mid-Ptolemaic period, Around the 3rd century BCE, someone built a massive new structure right across this processional way. You don't block a sacred road unless that road has lost its purpose. This was the era after Alexander the Great conquered Egypt. The old pharaonic system was giving way to Greek rule. Alexandria, the new capital, was pulling resources and people away from traditional centers like Imet. The city didn't die in some dramatic catastrophe. It slowly emptied as the world around it changed. Then the Nile did what the Nile does. It buried everything. Year after year, flood after flood, layers of silt covered the abandoned buildings. The apartment complexes that once housed thousands became foundations for farmers' fields. The temple of the cobra goddess became a barely visible mound. Imet became Tel al-Faraun, just another hill in the delta. For 2,000 years, people lived and farmed above this buried city, never knowing what lay beneath their feet, until those satellite images revealed the ghost of ancient streets. Now let's be honest about what this discovery actually tells us, and what it doesn't. The term tower houses sounds impressive, but we need to be careful. The archaeologists found massive foundations capable of supporting multiple stories, but the upper floors themselves are long gone. We're inferring the height from the engineering, not counting preserved floors. The dating also raises questions. Most of the spectacular finds, the tower houses, the fish stew, date to the 4th century BCE or later. That's already the late period, when Egypt was past its peak power. If this city was so important, where's the evidence from Egypt's golden age? Are we looking at a city that rose to prominence precisely because the old centers of power were declining? And about that fish stew, yes, it's remarkably preserved, but this isn't Pompeii. We're not looking at a city frozen in a moment of catastrophe. This is selective preservation, where certain materials survived in certain conditions, while 99% of daily life decomposed into nothing. The religious artifacts tell us about elite beliefs and practices, but what about ordinary people? Did everyone in those tower houses believe that water poured over a Horus Stella could cure snake bites? Or was this the ancient equivalent of expensive health care, available to those who could afford to visit the temple? Still, even with these caveats, Imet forces us to reconsider the story we tell about ancient Egypt. The conventional narrative says Egypt peaked with the pyramid builders and slowly declined through invasions and foreign rule. But here's a city from that supposed decline period that was innovating architecturally, thriving economically, and maintaining complex religious traditions. The Nile Delta, it turns out, wasn't just the swampy backwater of ancient Egypt. It was a laboratory for urban innovation, a commercial powerhouse, and home to cities that rival anything from Egypt's more famous Golden Age. We just couldn't see them because they were buried under some of the most fertile farmland on Earth. Dr. Hussein Abdelbasir from the Bibliotheca Alexandrina put it best. This discovery shows how much more there is to learn about the Delta region. And if Imet was hiding just 10 meters underground in plain sight, what else is down there? The team is already planning future excavations. They want to dig deeper to find the earlier layers of the city. Because here's the thing, the site of Imet, also known as Buto, was important long before those tower houses were built. This might have been one of Egypt's first capitals, before the pyramids, before the pharaohs as we know them. The late period city might be sitting on top of the birthplace of Egyptian civilization itself. Imagine what patient, careful excavation might reveal. Not just buildings and pottery, but the story of how scattered communities along the Nile became the world's first nation-state, how villages became cities, how cities developed the complex urban solutions we're only now rediscovering. And in an era when rising seas threaten the delta, when development pressures grow every year, when climate change accelerates the destruction of archaeological sites, every discovery becomes more precious. The window to find these lost cities is closing. The tower houses of Imet aren't just ancient architecture. They're proof that humans have always been ingenious problem solvers, creating vertical neighborhoods 2,400 years before anyone coined the term urban density. That pot of fish stew isn't just a meal. It's a reminder that behind every archaeological discovery are human stories. Interrupted lives, forgotten innovations. We found a city that transformed our understanding of ancient Egypt, not in some remote desert, but under fields where people have been farming for millennia. Makes you wonder what's under your feet right now. Maybe that's the real magic of Imet. Not the Horus Stela or the Cobra Goddess Temple. It's the reminder that the past isn't gone. It's just waiting. Waiting for the right technology, the right team, the right moment to emerge from the mud and change everything we thought we knew. The last residents of Imet probably never imagined their apartment buildings would vanish so completely that their entire city would become myth. They certainly never imagined that 24 centuries later, satellites in space would find their streets, their temples, their unfinished dinners. But then again, what will archaeologists find of our cities in 2,000 years? What stories will our ruins tell? The past keeps surprising us, and that's exactly why we keep digging.